and welcome to MOFGA's 23rd Annual Public Policy Teach-In at the Common Ground Country Fair. I'm Nancy Ross, member of MOFGA's Public Policy Committee, and I'm going to introduce the panelists at the beginning, and all of them. Then they'll go in the order that I'm introducing them. Emmie Theberge is the Federal Project Director at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. She's been with NRCM for 9 years. She's a Maine native, graduated from Colby College, where she studied environmental policy and government. She interned at the Governor's Office of Energy Independence and Security, as well as in Melbourne, Australia, for the Department of Sustainability and Environment. Emmie has traveled extensively and studied diverse ecosystems across the planet, from the forests of Tasmania and the Andes to the deserts and Himalayan mountains, from the jungles of the Amazon to the unique biodiversity of the Galapagos. Our second speaker is Senator Shawna Fellows from Manchester, who represents 12 towns in southern Kennebec County in the Maine Senate. She serves on the Labor, Commerce, Research, and Economic Development Committee and owns Bellows and Company, a nonprofit consulting firm. She was the 2014 Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate in Maine. And before that, she was executive director of the Maine branch of the American Civil Liberties Union. She was a key leader in the successful 2012 ballot campaign to pass same-sex marriage in Maine, and she co-chaired a successful 2011 statewide ballot campaign to expand voting rights. Before MCLU, she was a volunteer with the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps Vista. Beth Ahearn joined the staff of Maine Conservation Voters in 2012 after working as their contract lobbyist for the 2010 and 2011 legislative sessions. She's been a whitewater rafting guide in the Forks and a sailing instructor on Penobscot Bay. She received her JD from the University of Maine in 1988, was assistant district attorney in Cumberland and Androscoggin counties, and was staff attorney for Maine Audubon from 1991 to 1996. From 2000 to 2005, she represented the best interests of children as a guardian ad litem in custody cases, and most recently she was a lobbyist with Moose Ridge Associates, where her clients included conservation, social justice, and domestic violence organizations. So let's give a round of applause to And I think we have enough time so that it's okay if you applaud after each speaker. I'm gonna usually say hold your applause, but don't hold your applause. Emmie is going to talk to us about public policy issues. Oh, I didn't even say the topic of this teach-in. For the first time in 23 years, I believe, the teach-in is going to be a workshop in making America green again. What you can do to resist the onslaught against our environmental laws under, I'll just say it, the Trump administration. And Emmie is going to talk about what those environmental policy issues are at the state and federal level. Shawna is going to talk about how you can run for political office at every level. And Beth is going to talk about how to lobby and connect with your legislators at the state and federal level.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. You may not want to applause after I go. Luckily, the inspiration will follow mine, and I'll be the bearer of bad news, unfortunately. So my name is Emmie Theberge. I work at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. And we've been focused since Trump's inauguration on a lot of the rollbacks that we're seeing from DC and how that's going to affect Maine's environment. One of the most concerning things is cuts to the Environmental Protection Agency's budget and staff. And a lot of those funding resources actually come through to states like Maine, to our Department of Environmental Protection, which is already, after how many years now of the LePage administration, has also been worn down. So we were really concerned that any more cuts to EPA will harm Maine's environment in a number of different ways, from lake protection and water quality to clean air, to making sure that our beaches are safe, to lead in drinking water, a whole host of issues. We have information, both MCV and NRCM have information in the environmental concerns tent, which I strongly encourage you to check out, including a more detailed report on how those rollbacks will really harm Maine's environment. So that's sort of the number one issue that we're worried about. The president's proposed budget came out back in March, and we looked at that really closely and determined, that that's all very bad news for Maine. And now, as Congress maybe is working on things through the appropriations process, we are seeing how that's actually going to trickle out and what that final budget will look like. But it's incredibly important for you to contact your senators, whether you live in Maine or you live in another state. Your U.S. senators are going to be extremely important on this topic. Another issue that we're really concerned about has to do with clean water protections. So under the under the Obama administration, there was a new rule called the Clean Water Rule that was established. And what that rule does, you're probably all familiar with the Clean Water Act, right? So what the Clean Water Rule does is helps protect the smaller streams and tributaries and wetlands that feed into those larger rivers and lakes that are protected under the Clean Water Act. So this is a really important rule, especially here in Maine, where we get a lot of our water, drinking water from those sources. So making sure that the tributaries that feed into those larger rivers need to be protected too. And the Trump administration is looking to roll back that rule. That's happening both through the Environmental Protection Agency as well as in Congress. So that's another area where you can take action. There's actually a public comment period that's open right now at EPA. We have postcards at our table where you can sign your name, and we'll add your official comment into the EPA's docket saying that you oppose that rollback. And then, again, it's another important thing to follow up with our senators and representatives on because we're seeing similar attacks in Congress. The third topic that I wanted to bring up has to do with the National Monument. How many of you guys are from Maine? Just curious. Okay, great. And how many of you know about the new National Monument? How many of you have been to the new National Monument? All right. So you've probably seen in the news that Secretary Zinke, Trump's Secretary of Interior, has started did a review process of a number of different national monuments that were designated both under the Obama administration as well as previous administrations, to look at those national monument designations. And through that process, which was also a public process, something like 260,000 public comments in support of the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument were sent in. So thank you for any of you who submitted a comment. Fewer than 100 were in opposition. So this is 99.96% of the comments that went into during that review process were in support of Katahdin Woods and Waters. We're still waiting to see Secretary Zinke's final report. You might have seen in the news earlier this week that some of that might have been leaked to the Washington Post. They did a story, but there wasn't really enough detail in that leaked memo to know exactly what those implications might be for cottonwoods and water. So we're still waiting, following it very closely. NRCM has been working on this issue for 6 years. So we will be informing all of you, when it's time to act once we hear what those final recommendations might be. And the last thing, there's more than 4, unfortunately, but I thought I'd only talk about 4. Has to do with clean car standards. So that what this means is our fuel economy standards. How many miles per gallon our cars and trucks they need to have. And in 2012, the Obama administration passed really good clean car standards that would bring our fuel economy standards much better, would make them much better. And there was a review process for that, obviously. The auto industry was involved, lots of public comment, and that was established. And now the Trump administration's Environmental Protection Agency wants to re-review. There's a lot of reviewing going on with this administration to try to roll back those standards. And in a place like Maine, where we're the tailpipe of the nation, not just in terms of car pollution and power plant pollution that's coming because of the way that the wind comes into our state. We have really high rates of asthma, and we obviously drive a lot. So it's important for Mainers to have better fuel economy standards. It saves us money at the pump. It reduces the local air pollution that we have here in our state. Reduces climate change, of course, and all of those other local air quality concerns related to public health. So this is a really important standard that we're concerned about. This is probably one of the strongest things in terms of climate change that happened under the Obama administration. So for these to be rolled back is really concerning. So I think I might leave it there so I don't overwhelm you with too much bad news. But as you can imagine, I'm sure for all of the issues that you care about that aren't environmental, across the spectrum of issues that we care about, of course we need to be really diligent. And the news, I think, sometimes, can be distracting on what different topics are of the day, and things like the environment often aren't featured in the news. So I really encourage you to connect with organizations like NRCM and MCV and others that are tracking this every day. It's part of our job to track these issues every day, and you can check in with us and we can let you know what's happening. Thanks.
Welcome. It's wonderful to see this crowd. It's a privilege to be on a panel with Beth and Emmie because they are truly doing phenomenal, tireless advocacy, both at the state level and the federal level, and we're so fortunate to have them on the front lines of the environmental movement in Maine. My name is Shenna Bellows. I'm a state senator. I'm also a former candidate for U.S. Senate. I was the Democratic nominee in 2014. And I'm going to talk about why you should run for office and how. So one of my favorite moments in the 2014 campaign was when one of my best friends called me, and she and her young daughter had been watching a debate between me and Susan Collins the night before. And her daughter turned to her and said, "Mommy, can only women be senators?" And that for me was incredibly rewarding, and I think a fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves and our country is, what do we want our politics to look like? Who do we want our children and our grandchildren to see in office? For me, it is more women, it is more environmentalists, it is more people who believe in science and the fact that climate change is a real and immediate threat to our world. I think we need more farmers to run for office and people who respect and care for our land and our water and our air. And that is the number one reason I think you should run for office. I want to see you getting engaged. So first, how do you make that decision? First, think about your story. And I'm here to tell you that there is no linear path to serving in public office. Everyone's story is unique and different and brings something particularly important to public service and public life. I grew up in Hancock, a small town close to Acadia National Park. I grew up without electricity or running water until I was in the 5th grade. My father was a carpenter. For me, economic justice and environmental justice were huge motivating factors in running for office. I'm not wealthy. I worked in nonprofits my entire career, from the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps to then working as the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union. And my decision, thank you, round of applause for the ACLU. And so my decision for running for office, for running for US Senate that first time, sometimes people say, what made you try? What made you think that that was an important thing to do? I'll tell you, I was working at the ACLU, and I was a member of the Maine Choice Coalition, women's groups dedicated to advocacy around reproductive rights. And there was a budget bill in Congress that would have defunded Planned Parenthood, only the 1st or 2nd or 10th or 100th of many, I think. And unfortunately, there was a procedural vote, and Collins voted for it, and we were all promoting that fact in that coalition meeting, and someone said, somebody really should challenge her. And I nodded and agreed, and I didn't think it was necessarily me. And then I was working as a leader on the marriage equality campaign, and I helped found Republicans for the Freedom to Marry, even though I'm a Democrat, because we needed to have a bipartisan campaign of support for marriage equality. And we invited Susan Collins to join that campaign, and she declined. And I thought, somebody should run against her. And then I was at the ACLU, and we brought a bill before the legislature, one of the first states in the country to require a warrant before law enforcement accesses your email or your phone records. And a reporter said to me, this is all well and good that you achieved this in the state of Maine, but isn't the real problem at the federal level? And I said, yes. And that's when I decided to run for United States Senate. So I share that story because everyone's story is different and unique, and everyone's decision-making process is unique. But I think that there are 3 questions to ask yourself. What is your story? Who are you? Where do you come from? What are your values? What's really important to you? What do you want to say? Running for office gives you a microphone, quite literally, in venue after venue, sometimes crowds as small as 5, sometimes crowds as large as 500 in the state of Maine. So what is it that you want to say about climate change, about the monuments, about clean water, about clean air? And what is it that you would like to achieve? And this is the hardest thing, because those achievements can be incremental, they can be defensive. Sometimes you run for office just to stop bad things from happening or things from getting worse. But what is your vision for the world that you would like to see? And then you pick your race. So I think it's really important to think about your sphere of influence and what makes you most passionate and fired up, because running for office is not easy, and serving in office is not always fun either. If you really care about curriculum, if you're concerned that science isn't being taught in our schools, that young people aren't learning about climate change or evolution or ecology, run for your school board. My friends on school boards and local offices will tell you that sometimes, many times, those seats are uncontested. And the people on the school boards are making decisions about what our children are learning in our schools. It's incredible, and they're making decisions about budgets. They're making decisions about what departments are being kept and what departments are being eliminated. It's an incredibly important decision. If you care about wetlands and wildlife in your town, run for planning board. My mom is in the audience, and she was an early inspiration for public service for me, because if you may remember, back in the early 80s, the bald eagle was endangered, in significant danger. And there was a bald eagle's nest in our town, and there was a proposed development that was going to go in and destroy that habitat. So my mom ran for planning board, and she and the other planning board members were successful in stopping that development and preserving that nest. And for me as a child, that was an enormous lesson in the power of public service to make a positive difference. So if you care about what's going on in your town, your local community, run for the planning board. It's yet another position where people are begged to run, where nobody wants to do it. where having strong environmentalists on that planning board can make a huge difference in your town's zoning laws and in the developments that go in your town. Select board, town council, those are they make the decisions about the overall municipal and town budgets. My father ran for select board, and he did it for about 20 years because, again, no one else wanted to do it. You hear a theme here. At these local levels, we need good people to get involved because our local officials are making key decisions about our local environment. It's really very hugely important. State legislature is something that is easier than people think. I'm here to tell you that if you don't have deep pockets, you should still run for office. Maine has something very special called public financing. It's the Maine Clean Elections Act. We've defended it. We won it on the ballot because of the people the first time. We defended it on the ballot again 2 years ago to keep it in place and strengthen it. It's a fight to make sure that it's funded in the legislature every year, but it remains funded. And what that means is you can run for office as a publicly funded candidate. All you have to do is collect $5 contributions from friends or neighbors in your town to qualify, and then you don't have to raise money. You can spend your time talking to actual voters, and you can run and become a state house representative or a state senator in Maine without having deep pockets or having to fundraise. If you are passionate about what's happening at the federal level, run for Congress. And I will say this, open seats in Maine's congressional delegation don't come along very often. There are only 4 seats. There are 2 members of Congress and 2 senators, and they're extraordinarily influential in the country. But I will say that running for Congress, even if you don't win, does give you a platform to move the conversation on issues that you care about. Marriage equality. Susan Collins had not endorsed marriage equality when I ran for U.S. Senate. But she really wanted the Human Rights Campaign endorsement, and I had come out, I was a leading activist on marriage equality. So she endorsed marriage equality, and I am very proud of that. It was a long time coming, but it happened. I think that you can move people in the direction, including on environmental issues, of where you want them to be just by challenging incumbents and making them nervous about their future prospects. You may win, but even if you don't, it's worth running. If that's where you want to make a difference, if you want to engage in that national conversation about climate change, about the monuments, and about our clean air and clean water. So you've picked your race, you've decided you want to run. How do you run? So I'm going to give you a brief, just a thumbnail of that. I have 4 F's that I thought about before I ran. The family, financing, field, and fun. And I'm going to start with family, because running for office is a 24/7 job. It takes all of your time and resources, both running for the state legislature or running for Congress. So it's really important that you work with your family to figure out what's important as a family. With my husband, what dates are important? Are they supportive? Are they okay? Is now a good time? Can you afford it personally, financially? Financing. For the state legislature, I would go the public financing route, but for running for Congress or even running for those local offices, there isn't public financing available yet. So creating a campaign budget and thinking about how you're going to raise that money. And I'm here to tell you that there are progressive environmental donors and organizations that will help with that fundraising. There are people who want to support progressives. There are people who want to support environmentally responsible candidates, but it's all about, you need to make a budget, and then you need to figure out where you're going to recruit those donations from. Field. So whether you're running at the federal level or whether you're running at the local level, I knocked on 10,000 doors to win my state Senate seat. And it's as simple as it sounds. You recruit volunteers to drive you. I see a few in the audience. And then you literally go door to door in your district, knocking on doors, introducing yourself, and saying, what issue are you most passionate about? What do you care most about? Now, 10,000 doors takes thousands of hours, but it can be done. And I think that conversation, friend to friend, neighbor to neighbor, I think is part of what we need to do to build a resistance and to win our country back. Until we start talking with people with whom we disagree, or people who may be undecided or ill-informed, until we start having conversations and really listening to them, we're not going to see the national change that we need. So that field plan, and it really is having those one-on-one conversations, is extraordinarily important at whatever level you're going to run. And then finally, I say fun because politics is not that fun. We're living in a really dark time. You know, we have days and weekends like this that give us hope, where we're among like-minded people who want to save the earth, who want to do better, who are investing in solar and limiting waste and finding more sustainable agricultural practices to feed our communities. The weekends like this give us hope, but when we read the national and state level news, it can be extraordinarily depressing. And when you're serving in office and you're seeing decisions get made behind closed doors for all of the wrong reasons, when you see that corporate lobbyists sometimes do have more influence than the amazing environmental lobby, that can be heartbreaking and it can be really, really difficult. So in your campaign plan, and I did this on the US Senate race, incorporate some elements of fun. For me, the walk across Maine that I insisted on doing, I walked from Holton to Kittery. I talked with my campaign staff, and initially my campaign staff were like, what? You want to walk across the state? Why? How are you going to fundraise during that time? And I said, for me, that will make it fun. For me, that will give me an experience that's unique, that will be rewarding, that is something that will be really meaningful to me. When I ran for state senate, I looked for events, like a local bird walk, for example, that I could participate in as a candidate, but that would also feed my soul and keep me connected to why I was doing what I was doing. So those are the 4 F's in your campaign plan. I could talk in much more detail when we get to the question and answer period about really fleshing that out. There's some remarkable opportunities, political training opportunities. If you're a progressive, there's a Progressive Change Campaign Committee. If you're a woman and a Democrat, there's Emerge Maine. I did a lot of training before I ever ran for office. But here's the thing. I mentioned we are living in dark, dark times. The only way we're going to find our way out of these times is if we lean forward and engage. If we move through that heartbreak, if we participate, if we make ourselves the decision makers, then we can create the world that we want to see. Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Beth and I'm going to come down here because I have things I want to hand out to you. Can you see me? Yeah, you can see me down here. So first of all, I want to say that public office, and you should all run, and until you do, please reach out to your legislators on the state and the federal level. They're there because they think they are doing service for Mainers. And I'm telling you, they get paid very little money. State legislators get paid essentially nothing. It's really a volunteer job, and even though it's supposed to be part-time, they put in many, many hours, and they work really hard. And I just can't even thank Shenna enough. She is really an amazingly hard worker. So I just want to say that no matter what party they're from, they're working really hard, and the only people that they want to hear from are constituents. So your voice is so important. Legislators say to me, if they hear from 3 to 4 constituents on a bill, that's a lot. So your voice, until you run for office, please contact your representatives. And if you don't know who they are, a great place to find that out is our website, Maine Conservation Voters.org. You can just put in where you live and your representative, your senator and your rep will pop up. So I also just want to say that yes, we are living in really dire times and we've had to fight, but we get Trump, right? Because we've had LePage for 7 years. So we know who this is. We've dealt with this. So we're telling states around the country, we're coaching them on how to deal with this sort of personality. But I will say, there are a few bright spots this legislative session. The governor vetoes everything we care about, everything on the environment. But this year, we were able to override his vetoes a majority, like 4/5 of the time. Yeah, so that was really good. And that's new. We now have the strongest metallic mineral mining protections in the entire country. And I feel very good about those. It took us 5 years to get there, and the governor vetoed it, but we have them. The second thing that happened this year, and you might not have heard about it, but that we are the first state in the country, a year ago, to ban flame retardants in upholstered furniture. So that's big. LePage, firefighters led on that bill, and we were right there with them, because firefighters are the ones who are most exposed to toxic fumes from burning furniture. So LePage vetoed that, but the legislature overrode him. And the reason the legislature overrode him is because they realized Mainers want to protect firefighters. So it's you that makes the difference. So how many of you have contacted your elected officials, either on the state or the federal level? Fabulous, that's really great. So what I'm going to pass out to all of you is on the federal level. Pass those. We have a handy dandy, just a little sheet of paper here that has the names and numbers of our 4 federal delegates. Susan Collins, Angus King. Yeah, that'd be great, thank you. Bruce Poliquin and Shelley Pingree. And I will say Susan Collins, again, I just can't emphasize enough, she started being really unsure about climate change. 5 years ago, I don't think she mentioned the words. She has now become a believer, and she is a real proponent and understands what's happening in Maine with climate change. So, and it's because, again, she knows it's impacting Maine, and because she's heard from many of you. So thank you for contacting your legislators and for reaching out to the federal delegation. And I just want to also let you know, so what Shenna didn't tell you is that legislators, they list their cell phones publicly. They are so accessible. They have no staff. So if you want to meet with one of them, they are happy to meet with you in your town or come to Augusta when they're in Augusta. They are the most accessible people imaginable, and they want to hear from you. On the federal level, I think what's happened since people have been so alarmed, it takes a little longer for Susan. I don't know. Have you contacted Susan Collins? Have you heard from her? Yeah. Some people say no.
Slow though.
Yeah, it's slow. It takes a while, but it's really, really important. I've been in those offices where they're counting the amount of phone calls, and the phone rings off the hook, which is great. Keeping the pressure on helps our electeds do the right thing. So, what else did I want to say? I think that's all I want to say. What I want to know is what you want to know. Who's got questions? Yes.
Hi. I actually live in Massachusetts, so this is a question kind of for everybody on the panel. I'm pretty sure, like, Liz Warren and Markey are, like, fight and fight. And I get conflicting advice about whether or not it's worth me calling senators outside my state.
Shenna can tell you better than this, but yes, you need to let them know they're doing the right thing, because they need to know that, yes, their constituents want them to do this. And I think, did you want to answer that, Shenna?
Sure. I will just add to that. So there was a bill recently where I was getting a lot of pressure from the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine on the opposite side of where my heart was. And then suddenly constituents started contacting me from my district, and suddenly my district shared with me that they wanted me to do what my heart wanted me to do. And that was extraordinarily helpful, because at first all I was hearing from was the opposite side. And I think that happens a lot in politics, and I think the other thing that it does is it gives your representatives the courage to be even fiercer fighters. So one thing that we need Elizabeth Warren and Markey to do are be bold, really bold, and bold fighters, not be cautious during these times. So I think reaching out even to people with whom you agree is as important as reaching out to people with whom you disagree.
Yeah, that was a really good question.
But I think she had another part of the question, which was, for example, you're probably wondering, should you contact Senator Collins and Angus King, who are maybe more influential? And I think that, and I'd be curious what you think at the state level, but at the federal level, generally they want to hear from their constituents. There are ways that you can help with that So there's quality and quantity usually. So as we're trying to influence different decision makers, we want to have really quality comments. So that might be somebody who's close to that decision maker, or somebody who's really an expert on the issue that's happening. And then we also want volume. We want rallies and petitions and phone calls. And so I would say there are opportunities for you to find a way to participate in that, even when your decision makers, or when you're trying to influence decision makers that aren't your own. Less so with petitions, because they want to see that they're actually your constituent. But you can show up to a rally. No one's asking for your driver's license when you come across the border. So there's things like that you can do.
So I have another handout here. I forgot to talk about this. So I even though I say please call your legislators, they're really accessible. Some people are like, oh, I'm afraid. I don't know if they'll listen to me. I don't know enough about the subject. You don't have to know a lot about the subject. You just need to let them know how you feel about it. And I created these little lobbying tips. So I'm just going to read quickly through them. If you want to pick them up, I can pass them out. If you grab one, if you want to. Introduce yourself. It's most important that these people hear from constituents, so they need to know that you are a constituent. Share a personal connection if you have it. I think we all who live here know that there's just one degree of separation, right? There's not more than two. So there's probably one person between you and your elected, if that. Be respectful and polite. This seems like it's common sense, but it can't be overstated. Plan to listen as much as you talk. And even if your legislator doesn't agree with you, you can let your opinions be known in a respectful way. Stay on good terms because they might be with you on another issue. Relationships matter, particularly in this state when, like I said, most people, it's a small state. Number 3, make a specific ask. Stay focused on your goal. If there's a bill you care about, you say, will you support LD such a legislative document, or the bill to such and such? And then you be quiet. You wait for an answer. And legislators will tell you, it makes them very uncomfortable that they're put on the spot, but it's really, that's what you're there for, and that's what they're there for. Explain why number 4, explain why the issue matters to you. Again, you don't have to be an expert. Why do you want toxics out of furniture? Right? You don't have to be a scientist to talk about that. It's because you want to protect your health, the health of children, and the health of firefighters. Always tell the truth. If you don't have an answer, that's okay. If you get asked a question by a legislator, let them know you'll get back to them. If you write to your legislator or meet with them, when you write to them, don't use form letters. You can use talking points, and we do this. Maine Conservation Voters sends out emails with templates. But please don't use those verbatim. Change those. Legislators say again and again, I don't want form letters. I want to hear from my constituents in their own words. And always thank them for meeting with you, for talking to you, even if they don't agree. So that's it. If you want these, I'll pass them out. And please, please, please do reach out to your legislators and to your federal officials. And then run.
Let's give Beth a round of applause and then we'll...
You have a question?
It's not really a question, it's just a comment, because it's personal to me. My son is in the legislature, but he's there as an independent. And I don't know, I walked into this in progress, so I don't know if I'm not sure who's on the panel, or if they're Democrat or Republican, but there is a third option. And,
Yes.
he chose that, and against pretty much all odds he won. And-
Casas?
Yes. He's doing a great job.
He's doing a great job.
And I just wanted to say that independent, unenrolled, centrist, whatever you want to say, I think it's an up-and-coming movement. So
Well-
I don't know if any discussion has been about not going with one. I know that just a couple of days ago I heard a Democrat who unenrolled. And I think they're up to 8 or 9 now
Yeah.
in the legislature.
And thank you for bringing. Right. This has not been a partisan discussion. This has been talking about LePage and Trump hating the environment. But other than that, 35 to 30, I think it was 36% last election. I don't have a great memory for numbers of voters in Maine are independent. So yeah, that's a very important point. Other questions over here?
What do we need to do to make sure where are we at with ranked choice voting to make sure we get to
I'm going to let our senator answer that one.
Did people hear the question? Do we have another microphone that we can pass around?
Okay, so the question was, how do we make sure ranked choice voting happens?
So just so folks know, the public passed ranked choice voting in Maine on the ballot. I was really proud to be one of the advocates for that campaign. I did a lot of public speaking across the state about it. The legislature then asked the Maine Supreme Judicial Court for a solemn occasion, an opinion on ranked choice voting. And the Maine Supreme Judicial Court ruled that it could be unconstitutional, in fact, that there should be language change in Maine's constitution. So there was an effort to amend the Constitution of Maine, which happens fairly routinely in our state, to allow ranked choice voting. But unfortunately, a constitutional amendment in the legislature needs a 2/3 vote, and so that did not pass. There was a counter effort against ranked choice voting, and we saw a lot of this in the legislature, just full-on repeal of what the voters wanted. That also failed because those of us who care about ranked choice voting were able to defeat that. So now we're in a place where there may be a special session in October. The week of October 23rd is what's being discussed. And ranked choice voting may be part of the conversation during that special session, or alternatively, it will be part of the conversation in January. If nothing happens in the legislature, then we will have ranked choice voting in the next election. The risk that gives some legislators heartburn, and I think I understand where they're coming from, I think it's a rational concern, is that if we have elections under ranked choice voting and then like losing candidate were to sue and to say that the outcome was unlawful and unconstitutional, that could throw the state into a bit of chaos. So it is that's true. It's constitutional in the primary and the federal elections, just not in the state. Thank you, Betsy Sweet. Just not in the state election. And so one option is to suspend the portion that has been deemed to be unconstitutional and have it for the primaries and for federal elections in Maine, so have a bifurcated system. Another is there's also a bill to suspend it entirely until a constitutional amendment passes. So those are two sort of middle way options. And I will say that unfortunately repeal is still on the table. People are still talking about repeal. So if you care about ranked choice voting, and Beth spoke very eloquently about this, that is definitely an issue where there's a lot of doubt in the legislature right now. I will say that there are advocates there are proponents of ranked choice voting, legislators who believed in it, who voted for it, who are still contemplating repeal because they are concerned about what might happen if nothing happens. And there are people who are opposed to ranked choice voting who came around to the idea that we should fulfill the will of the voters and are willing to take some sort of medium step. So this is where your voice absolutely will determine the outcome, because I cannot predict today what is going to happen, because I honestly don't think even most legislators know where they stand. I know where I stand. I will not vote for repeal. I really think we need to honor the will of the voters, and I think honestly in Maine, especially given that we do have people who are very independent minded, I think that ranked choice voting is the right way to go.
So you have a question?
I'd rather not use that if it's okay.
I have to repeat it though, because we're being recorded.
So this is more of a federal question. It's so obvious what's happening with the EPA right now that it's impossible to ignore that Pruitt has this deep-seated disdain for the agency that he works for. So I'm wondering, and I don't want to hear contact the Trump administration, because I think that's not helpful. But what do you do about non-elected appointed officials that don't have constituents that have a huge influence over federal legislation, federal processes that are passed down in the states? Because that seems like there's a lot of that happening all the time, every day.
Sure.
So the answer is, how can we stop the Trump administration? It's not going to happen in the Congress, in the U.S. House of Representatives, right? But the Senate, there's a better chance there. The Senate and the courts are our backstop. So this is why Susan Collins has a target on her back all across the country, because it's the Susan Collinses in the Senate who can stop what Pruitt's doing, because the EPA has to have a budget, and that budget has to go through both chambers of Congress. So the Senate can stop a bad budget. So that's how you do it. We have to, you're right, the Trump administration we have no influence over. So we have to go to who can make a difference. And at this time it's the US Senate and the courts. So, did that answer your question?
Yes, but no. I mean, it's kind of like, we know what Susan's going to do. We know what Angus is going to do. Like, to her point in front of me, like, I feel like calling the people in Oklahoma and saying, hey, help support, it's like, I'm not the constituents. I don't really care. I'm an American citizen, and it affects everyone in America, right? So, yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but it doesn't feel like it has much of an impact.
Yeah, that's why we all have to get more people to vote everywhere.
Beth, can I add to that?
Yes.
And Emmie, I think, has something she wants to say as well. So I actually think that the neighbor-to-neighbor conversation really has to happen, because probably a lot of folks in this tent, maybe not everybody, understands what's happening with the EPA, but I think your general public in Maine does not. And remember, Trump did remarkably well, particularly in the 2nd District in Maine. So I think there's an overall lack of public information and awareness. And this is where letters to the editor for the voting population, particularly for the 65 and older population, are extraordinarily important. You can write a letter to the editor, depending on the newspaper, every 30 or every 60 days. I encourage you, if you have specific knowledge about what's happening, to do that. And also, I think social media has a tremendous amount of influence. And I think that posting what's happening, real news, I think people are trusting their friends and their family members more than they're trusting other objective sources, for better or for worse. And so I think helping to educate your own sphere about what actually is happening, and not assuming that people know, because I don't think they do. And that's how we got here. And we're not going to get out of it unless, there's the 4 years that Trump is in office, or 8, God forbid. But we're not going to get out of it unless we have a cultural change, unless we start talking to people who don't value or aren't as well informed about the environment as we are. So I do think there's something to be done there as well. Like, as heartbreaking as that is, and as much of a downer as it is to keep posting bad stuff on Facebook, but
It's actually pretty similar to what I was going to say. So.
and I will say, I've been in letters to the editor. The elected reps pay a lot of attention. On the federal level, they still have a clipping service. This is 2017. They still clip letters to the editor. So that's a very powerful way to not let your neighbors know, but electeds focus a lot on letters to the editor. That's true in Maine as well.
This is a very simplistic question. If I have a choice between email, like to Senator Collins, or calling during the day when I can leave a message directly with staff, or calling at night when it's more convenient for me, and if I can get through to a voicemail, is one more important or more influential than the other?
Actually, that's a really good question. I think it depends on the individual legislator, and I would say, actually, if you can do both. Other questions? I saw some hands.
I hate to be cynical, but I've called Susan Collins' office and left a message, and was trying to think of something else to say, and this little recorded thing came on and said, "You have 10 seconds more to finish your message." And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I waited for 10 seconds, and then it said, "If you want to send this message, press 1." So I'm wondering, in the past, I had left a message, finished what I had to say, and just hung up. And I'm wondering if they ever even recorded or counted that message, or if you have to wait till the very end and push 1 to send the message. Do you have any idea?
I do not. But the other thing you can do with Susan Collins, I would do this, is, I don't know where you live, but call the office closest to you. You do that? Yeah, I think that's as effective. Anyone else? Oh, over here.
Hi, I was just curious about I went over to Augusta myself and, actually lobbied for the last round of solar bill, and I gave testimony and everything like that. But, it was really disheartening to see that go through so successfully through the Maine state legislature. And then, we knew that the veto was coming from LePage, but to see those in the aftermath when going for the veto override, they people like jumped ship and changed their vote. When they voted before so successfully and got it passed in the first round, but when it comes to the veto override, they changed their mind. And I was wondering what's like an insider's view of that. Like are they beholden to LePage for some reason there, or that's unseen by the general public, or not?
I think party, unfortunately, is a hugely powerful motivator. I think we saw this on the budget when the Republicans shut down the government in Maine. When we're not having financial difficulties, the tax revenues are at the highest they've ever been. And so I do think that partisanship, unfortunately, there's some toxic partisanship at Augusta that makes people change their minds. And I do think what makes people not change their minds is when they feel that the consequences of that vote would be worse than adherence to the governor. And so what we need to do, I have two thoughts on this. One, we need to make our voices heard. Now, Mainers are very polite. We tend to you contact your legislator once and then you think, okay, I've done it. I don't want to bother that person. Bother that person. Follow up with them after their vote and say, I'm disappointed in you, or thank you. And then the second thing that I will say about this is a really disheartening process, right? Like Pruitt, the EPA, the solar bill getting vetoed and not overridden. Like politics is very ugly in some ways right now. The wrong people are in control. And when you get in there, when you go to Augusta and you lobby and you speak your truth and you think you're changing hearts and minds and then they just do what the governor wants them to do, it's tempting to say, okay, I'm just going to go live like in the middle of the woods and I'm going to shut off all media and I'm just going to try to forget that this is all happening because it's just so disgusting. And so I say this, I did not enjoy my first year in the legislature, but I'm doing it because I feel called to do it. Because I am very concerned at the course that we're on as a state and a nation. And so please keep contacting your representatives. Keep calling Susan Collins, even if you're not sure that message is getting through. Keep calling every time a new vote comes up, even though it's the same issue. Keep going to Augusta to testify, even though last year it didn't work. Because the only way we're going to change things is if we engage more, if we get more involved, not less.
Do you think that those legislatures that changed their vote on the veto override, do you think their constituents are somewhat? I would think they would be puzzled somewhat, about their.
There was a representative from Cumberland who voted against Land for Maine's Future, and he changed his vote. This was 2 years ago on the crucial override vote.
And on solar.
And on solar. This is where the environmental activists are so amazing. People in Cumberland who were upset let all of their friends and neighbors know. And they worked their heart out for someone to run against him, and that person won. And that man is no longer in the legislature. So if you're upset at somebody who voted against solar on the override, who changed their mind, create some flyers, start passing them out. Let everyone in your town know that person didn't have the guts to stick to their principles, regardless of what they did. They changed their minds. They're waiting to see which way the wind blows. And find someone to run against them, maybe it's you, and run and win. That's how we make change.
And letting...
And I was going to add, I think what Shenna said about the accountability piece is really important. We often are emphasizing, make a phone call right now, the vote's going to happen, we need to get a lot of calls in, but it's equally as important on the other side of that vote, especially when something like that happens where people are switching their votes because of politics instead of listening to their constituents. And so when you're able, we call that accountability. So when you're able to do that in a more public way, such as a letter to the editor, you know, I had a conversation with my representative, and he told me he was going to vote this way, and yesterday he voted the other way. I'm extremely disappointed in this. Having a public letter like that and it doesn't have to be in the Portland Press Herald or the Bangor Daily. It can be in your local weekly paper, which you know, we all get and read. So that accountability piece is really important.
And I will add that the accountability worked last year. There were several of those people who walked on solar last year who flipped, who did not flip this time because they got beaten up so badly in their district.
Yeah, okay.
So the other thing that I want to account on accountability, I also brought Maine Conservation Voters. We do politics. We do more than just lobby. We get involved in elections, and we also do an accountability document. We're allowed to do this because we have a C4, and this tells you how your legislator voted on every environmental issue, and it tells you who flipped. So I leave these here. This is the 2016. The 2017 will be in the mail next week, and at the environmental concerns tent, you can put your name on the list and get a hard copy of this or get an email copy. And I'll pass these around.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you for coming and participating.